Good evening. On behalf of Christine Brancalini, Dean of the William H. Hannon Library, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you to our joint opening reception and kickoff event for the 2018 Bellarmine Forum and for the library's fall 2018 exhibition, Sincere and Emotional Stories of Connection. My name is John Jackson. I am here in the place of Christine Brancalini, who is traveling. I'm the head of outreach for the library. Before we get started, just a little bit of administrivia. You'll notice on your seats you have some feedback forms. If you could please fill those out before the end of this evening, let us know what you enjoyed, what you learned, what surprised you. That's very helpful for us in planning future events. Also, you'll notice, and this is especially something to note for our students, there is the chance to get entered into a $100 Amazon gift card raffle if you provide us with your email address. The other thing I should mention again for students is if you need LMU Leo credit, I have a computer up here at the front that I can swipe you in. If you don't know what LMU Leo is, don't worry about it. So I have the honor of introducing our first of many voices that you will hear this evening, our exhibition curator, Nina Keene. Nina is a graduate student in the Department of English at Loyola Marymount University, and when I asked Nina what she hopes viewers will take away from the experience of this exhibition, she said that her ultimate wish is that after seeing the exhibition, you will feel inspired by and connected to the artifacts rather than intimidated by them. Human connection brought these objects into existence, and through these objects, we can empathize with those relationships. In that statement, I think that Nina articulates exactly what we try to do here at the William H. Hannon Library. As librarians, as archivists, as educators, we invite and we encourage our students to connect with our collections, to physically interact with the materials of our past. Every object has a history, a provenance, an origin story, if you will. Our archives and special collections is a place where students can experience the pieces of our past that others have held onto and cared for hundreds of years. Nina will tell you in her presentation that working on this exhibition felt like sitting silently in the presence of a friend. I like to think, and I hope, that this experience has become part of your history. As a future scholar, as a writer, as an educator, a chapter in your origin story. And yet another story of collaboration and connection. So please join me in welcoming Nina Keene.
Hello everyone, I'm Nina Keene, the curator of Sincere and Emotional Stories of Connection. This exhibition is devoted to the theme of collaboration. So today I'll be talking about how curating the exhibition was collaborative for me. And I'll also speak about the collaboration or stories of connection that are present in a few of my favorite artifacts within. And I love them all. Though I suppose curating an exhibition seems lonely, and there definitely were hours I spent sitting at my desk with no human person in sight around me, I was consistently interacting with people from different time periods and places. Even during my most lonely hours, I was reading letters from people like Charles Lamb, a Romantic era poet and essayist. Two of his letters are on display in the exhibition, and they're very interesting, especially as one provides insight into a different generation's perception of mental illness. In a different letter that I found in Volume 2 of the Letters of Charles and Mary Ann Lamb, edited by Edwin Mars Jr., Lamb's sister, Mary Lamb, writes to her friend Sarah Stoddard, "You would like to see us as we often sit, writing on one table, but not one cushion sitting. Like Hermia and Helena in the Midsummer's Night Dream, I taking stuff, and he groaning all the while and saying he can make nothing of it, which he always says, till he has finished, and then he finds out he has made something of it." The process of writing while groaning all the while and criticizing your own work is something that I, and I'm sure many other aspiring writers, can relate to, and writers in general. More than that, though, this letter paints a vivid picture of the two siblings creating work in the same room. They're both vital to each other's creative process, while not necessarily explicitly involved. This is how a lot of my time at the library felt. As John mentioned earlier, like a friend was sitting in the room with me while I worked, and their presence, though not necessarily vocal, carried me through it. Besides this form of retroactive collaboration in a sense, I also had the great opportunity to meet a few of the artists behind the artifacts in my exhibit. One of them was John August Swanson, whose vibrant colors I have not seen in artwork elsewhere. His piece, Leap into the New, that is on display in the exhibition continues in that vein of unique, bold color and carries messages of peace and connection that I believe are very relevant today. Also worth noting, Swanson was a student of Corita Kent, a pop artist who I will speak about in more detail later. I also had the opportunity to meet Will Pupa, who is here today, another artist behind one of the pieces in the exhibition, and a clinical professor and artist in residence at the Marymount Institute. His detailed and meaningful sculpted piece, That All May Have Life, tells the founding story of the religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary, and is also on display in Sincere and Emotional. Now, I want to focus on speaking about 3 individual pieces in my exhibit and the stories they tell. To begin, I will talk about the books of poems written by the Bronte sisters, modestly titled Poems, that is on display. There are a few interesting narratives behind this artifact. Firstly, the authors of this book, Acton Kerr and Ellis Bell, are the Bronte sisters, or their pseudonyms anyway, and Charlotte and Emily Bronte respectively. It shouldn't come as a great surprise that these female authors published under male pseudonyms at the time. The book was published in 1846 after all. But what is surprising is how much agency one sister, Charlotte, exercised in order to get this book of poems into print. Charlotte Bronte, according to her own account in the preface to one edition of Wuthering Heights, found her sister Emily's poems, and because of their peculiar music, wild, melancholy, and elevating, those are Charlotte's words, she decided to try to get each sister's poems published, and her own, of course. Emily supposedly wasn't too happy because Charlotte found her personal poetry without Emily knowing, but that's a different story. Charlotte not only pretended to be a man when sending in these poems, but she went so far as to pretend to be the agent of the actual authors, probably to create a more intimidating literary persona. Her endeavors to get published were successful, though the book wasn't particularly. Purportedly, only 2 copies were purchased. Nevertheless, all 3 authors did go on to have successful literary careers, publishing books of their own. Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre is still being read widely today. In this case, the collaboration was a little bit forced in that Emily Bronte wasn't originally an active participant, though she was okay with it in the end. And I'd venture to guess that all sisters were happy with the results of Charlotte's bold effort. The next piece I'll speak about is Corita Kent's print, Love at the End. Corita Kent, who I mentioned earlier, was a pop artist and former nun. The piece in the exhibition, Love at the End, is a result of Corita's work with Daniel Berrigan, a Jesuit priest and social activist. I tell more about their story in the label in the exhibition, but today I want to talk about Corita's teaching methods a little bit. I've read a lot about her teaching methods as well as her attitude towards art, and one thing that always stuck with me is that she thought that you should never analyze your work while you're creating it. This sentiment by Corita Kent was personally motivating for me, as it imparts that a feeling of compassion towards oneself rather than self-criticism is the well out of which art springs up, and I believe many creative endeavors. Her piece, Insincere and Emotional, Love at the End, wraps up this general philosophy of hers, which seems to begin, at least to me, with love at the beginning. Love for yourself and collaboration with oneself. And of course, in this case, also Daniel Berrigan. Finally, the last piece whose creator's life I'll expound upon is the postcard on display by artist Rose O'Neill. As you can tell, this postcard advocates women's right to vote. This postcard contains an image of Cupid, a Cupid-like baby character, who Rose O'Neill created to illustrate love stories in Ladies' Home Journal magazine. The journal's editor, Edward Bach, supposedly encouraged O'Neill to give Cupid his own storylines because he thought readers of the journal would be delighted by him, and he was right. Cupid went on to extreme national and even international success, as did Rose O'Neill herself. The fact that O'Neill, who was born in 1874, became a successful female artist is noteworthy in and of itself. Her inspiration for Cupid, however, is with what I wish to wrap this speech up. It is a very heartfelt story. O'Neill, in her autobiography, wrote that Cupid was inspired by caring for her beloved younger siblings. Though O'Neill has never confirmed this, I have often wondered if the angelic baby character might also have been inspired by the death of the artist's younger brother, Edward. In her autobiography, Rose O'Neill recalled cuddling with the baby's body after he died, and says that she felt a sweet and curious sensation at finding a thimble that her sister Callista left on Edward's chest. Apparently, both sisters thought that their little brother was beautiful even in death, and they cuddled with him and played with him. And though O'Neill admitted that this might seem shocking to the average person, her family, she conceded, was outlandish. Years later, O'Neill claimed to have dreamt of Cupid dancing around her bed, a sweet-looking baby that was oddly cool to the touch. This story really moved me, and I like to think of Cupid as a joyful monument to O'Neill's baby brother. I hope you enjoyed listening to these stories of connection and collaboration throughout the ages. My wish is that you will feel the same sense of unity when you look at the artifacts on display. Thank you.
So after tonight's event, you'll have the opportunity during the eating portion of the evening to explore the exhibition, though please do not bring wine and food into the gallery. But you'll have a chance to explore that. Now I'd like to welcome the Dean of BCLA to the podium, who will introduce the next portion of our event, Robin Crabtree.
Thank you. So one of the great things about the Bellarmine Forum in general, and this one in specific, is this idea of collaboration and interconnectedness. And so as you'll all see from your brochures, which I hope you all have, few people are more adept at finding interconnections than our director of this year's Bellarmine Forum, Dr. Theresa DeBrome. So annually, the Bellarmine Forum is a celebration of the life of the mind in relationship to LMU's mission and, of course, our liberal arts educational traditions. We relaunched it a few years ago to be more explicitly connected to the curriculum, and we saw that our students shuffled in here just a few moments ago. But on the last page, you can see the number of courses that are connected to the Bellarmine Forum this year, which has a series of events and themes. And so Dr. Haran, who's here, is teaching a course on ministry and pastoral leadership that features an interfaith and interreligious collaboration and connection. Professor Charlotte Radler is teaching women in Christian history. Tracy T. Meyer is teaching women in religion. Professor Gil Ronsky, who is also right here, how could I miss you, is teaching women writing resistance. And of course, Theresa is teaching a special thematic course, Only Human, Read, Write, Watch, Create, Collaborate. And it is not surprising that so many of these courses deal with questions of gender, because this year's forum is not only a partnership with the Marymount Institute for Faith, Culture, and the Arts, but it is really meant to pay special tribute to the 50-year anniversary of the affiliation of the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Mary and the Marymount tradition with the Jesuit and Ignatian traditions of the former Loyola University, and when we became LNU. So it really is a great collaborative effort. Always in the Bellarmine Forum, we have not only classes and talks, we have exhibits, we have experiences and encounters. And so this is the kickoff event. I hope that you enjoy it. I hope that you'll come to other events, and I hope that you'll enjoy the spread, the Dean's reception here. We do feed well. So please join us for that and for other events. Now I want to introduce Teresia, but not without some aplomb. So you all know Teresia in this room as the formidable director of the Marymount Center for Faith, Culture, and the Arts, and also as professor of English. Somewhat surprisingly, because our careers do move over the years, she really began in comparative and Renaissance drama, focusing on William Shakespeare, but she has followed her passions to study medieval women mystics, beast epics, which Academy is a good place to do that. Elizabethan and Jacobean, did everybody get that? And Jacobean poetry and drama. She's published in multiple languages. She produces plays, and this year's Bellarmine Forum will culminate in the spring with a production of Bernstein's Mass. It's going to be incredible, for one, because she promised me it would be. In 1998, Teresia received the Lois P. and Donald H. Graves Award for Excellence in Teaching. Everything she does is teaching, everything she does is scholarship, and everything she does serves the mission of LMU. Teresia DeBroom.
Thank you all for coming. So grateful for you to be here. Thank you, Nina Keene, for your presentation. Thank you, intern Rachel Mullen, for all you've done in copying. Thank you, Jane, Chris Brancalini, for supporting this event, Cynthia Becht, and John Jackson for taking care of everything here, Dean Crabtree for supporting everything and inviting me, against my better judgment, to do this.
And Will.
And, well, yes, and Will. Thank you, Lady Beauvais, Chair of the Advisory Board of the Merit Institute. Thank you, Brian Traynor, who gave us all kinds of support. Thank you, Alison Mullen, who we couldn't have put the whole thing together without you. Thank you, Sarah Martinez, for your graphic design help and your incredible work producing everything and what we're about to see in a moment, I hope. Thank you to, hang on a second, all our interns, especially Tara Kuabas and Jordan Reebok, who are running the show tonight. And not least and not last, to Elias Wanimu, who could not be here tonight. Elias is the publisher of our press. I couldn't do what I do without him. And after 24 years in exile on penalty of death, he went back on the invitation of the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, and he's there now, running their press division and making books for them. And so, period, he has done some great work. So here we go, all collaborators. Here we go. All right, can you do the first slide? Okay, nobody knows what they're doing here. I have to do it. Oh, I can't do this. Someone has to do it. Okay, I thought Jordan was doing it. Okay, first slide. Okay, so I love this quotation, which is, the ripest fruit is not where one but only two can reach, which is this idea that what we do is never alone. We do it together. And there, when I was, very young, I thought, well, Beethoven, Van Gogh, Keats, Shelley, they sat in a room and they wrote their poetry and they did their stuff. But in fact, it takes two at least. And how does that work? Hillary Clinton said, it takes a village. I like John Denton better. No man is an island. We don't do things in isolation. Okay? Can we do this one? So this is the frontispiece of our brochure for the Bellarmine Forum, two hands, and they're two hands of the same person, but maybe they're two hands of what it means to do things together. And indeed, Vincent van Gogh had a brother and a sister-in-law who basically kept him alive to paint. We all know that there are no books without publishers or editors. And then there are the codified cultural and historical collaborations, orchestras, laboratories, classrooms, universities, religious orders, church congregations, libraries, museums, and galleries, bands, collectives, and farms. There are friendships, marriages, families, colleagues. There are makers of movies, plays, video games, the designers of fashion, from cooks to waiters, from the fanciest 3-star restaurant to the family table. No food would be prepared without a collaboration of some sort. The farmers' markets, the English pub, the French cafe, places where we meet and partake of each other's company and watch the world. There's the example of Moses, who did not wander in the desert alone. He was probably looking for a Chinese restaurant, but that's okay. Or Jesus, who almost never without his apostles and the women who accompanied him. There are fraternities, sororities, service organizations, crews that run ships and airplanes and spaceships, hospitals, those who play any sport from chess to soccer, who dance in a ballet, sing in a choir, serve in the military, fire and policemen. There are thousands of anonymous artists who built the greatest cathedrals of the Middle Ages. And whoever Homer really was, there were generations of poets who memorized his epics for 700 years to keep them alive until they could come and be written down for us to savor more than 2,700 years later. There's a list of relationships between collaboration and creativity. The list of collaboration and creativity is endless. For me personally, the ripest fruit and the most fun is what we do together. And that's why I chose this Bellarmine Forum's year theme. Okay, I think Judy's just out there, that's Judy Dater, with the rocks, and maybe they're like a new definition of stoned. That's all I can say. That's it. So here assembled are a group of people who have all acted in collaboration in profound ways here at LMU and elsewhere. And with each other, and in many cases with the Bellarmine Institute, they are all very distinguished. I'll only give you a bare bounds description of who they are, because I don't want to spend more time and waste that from what they tell you. In the bigger picture, when you go outside and have a drink and have something to eat, talk to them and talk to who they are and what they do. And I'll just do the last little bit of Tony Kushner's, who wrote Angels in America, maybe some of you know. Marx was right, the smallest indivisible unit is two. One is a fiction. We don't do anything alone, if we can help it. So I'm going to welcome up Sarah Martinez, who's going to talk now. I don't know how to do this whole thing. Did I stand here? Okay, good. I don't know how to do it. Okay, so Sarah Martinez came as a 19-year-old sophomore to our institute as an intern, and she was a graphic design major, and now she's 26 and has published and made probably 45 books?
Yeah, probably that amount.
Probably that amount. Okay, and so we're going to do the next slide. Okay, next one. Go ahead.
So this is some of our team at Sahai, Teresia and Elias in the middle, and some of our interns. And we all collaborate together every day working on books. And I think a big part of the Sahai mission is to capitalize on each person's strengths. So we have copy editors, illustrators, who all work on a piece of the book to create a final product, like this one here.
Great. This was a book that we'll talk about in a second. How do we do the next slide? Oh. This is Elias. You want to check out this book?
Sure. So this is Emmaus. This is a book about the Jesuit community at LMU. And we have this thing in our office called a book attack. So whenever we receive the books that are finally printed in our office, we all join together and celebrate and unbox the book together. And so this is one of our book attacks for appreciating the book.
And so this is a book about highlighting who the Jesuits are at LMU and what their stories are and how they're sort of legacy is transferred to what we have today, right?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And so this book is Discipleship in the Time of Impasse. This is part of the Mary Milligan lecture series, which we publish a book every year by a different author within the Jesuit community. And this book in particular, the cover is very collaborative because there's about 3 artists that are represented within this cover. So the first artist painted this image of the Saint Elias, which was actually a friend of Elias who just gave it to him as a gift, and then like, well, please, this for the cover. And we used images from Skid Row, which Madeline took, and I traced over them and painted over them to give a more painterly feel.
So we have this like African feel, and then we've got Elias Skid Row put together as part of what we're doing, right? And anytime we're employing about 10, we hope, interns to help us do what we're doing.
Yeah.
Okay?
So this is Menelik II's chronicle book, and this book was collaborative in the sense of the interior of the book, so we received the manuscript, and I had to resize it for a 6x9 book, which changed all the page numbers and all the footnotes and the references of the pages within the book. So our copy editor, Jeff, went through the entire book, and there's like hundreds, maybe thousands of footnotes that he had to go through. But Jeff is the kind of person who loves this kind of task, like he's just very excited to do this. And that's a pretty rare thing to find, but...
well, we've captured him.
Yeah, we've captured this page. Yeah, we're not getting rid of him. And so together we went through the entire book and replaced all the page numbers, but that's something that I couldn't have done by myself, and together we were able to accomplish this book.
And also, Menelik, as I understand, is the one person who stuck to the Italian, colonialism and fought back so Ethiopia was never colonized and was never enslaved, which is a great kind of story. And this is the first chronicle of what he did to save Ethiopia.
So this book is Temslet. It's a book of Ethiopian women, contemporary Ethiopian women, and their stories. And all these stories weave together to create one unified book that tells the story about women in Ethiopia and contemporary Ethiopia. And this book was very collaborative. I worked with Elias very closely about choosing fonts and the marketing for this book. So.
And also, this was like a kind of, what do you call it, rock star, here's in the diaspora, who are the women who will inspire you, and mostly women, and we got $30,000 to put this all into Ethiopian schools, hospitals, and so forth. And so we were able to put this out there to inspire young women in Ethiopia to be the best they can be, inspired from the diaspora, right? Okay, I think that's it. Is that good? Good. Larry, you're next. Distinguished Professor Larry Treidel, professor of many things, but expert on ancient history, right? And
a few things like that.
A few things like that, okay. And Larry and I worked together on a lovely conference, sort of, called Many Faces of War, and that turned into a book. So here we go.
This is the cover the brilliant cover that Sarah Martinez designed, and it is truly brilliant. It shows some of the images that were actually used on in the interior of the book. I'll just point out a few of these. Some of these will come up again, but if you'll note, top center is actually Ignatius of Loyola in armor. Some people don't remember that he actually began his life and career as a soldier. And this particular image revives it, shows that. The other images are from other ancient times. The image on the left, which is a close-up coming up, is Achilles looking down on Hector after he's been killed. But what the prime painter did with this was that he took particular care to show Achilles looking into the face of Hector, which is why this particular image was selected for the book. On the top right is a young man by the name of Manny Babbitt, who was probably not too many of you will recall that he's the last Californian killed by the state of California, executed in 1999. He was a native-born son of Massachusetts, Cape Verde Islander descent. To describe his upbringing as dirt poor would be to put a happy face on it. He was not only dirt poor in terms of his growing up, but he was also illiterate. Yet he was able to join the United States Marine Corps in 1967 because the Marine Corps recruiter took the entrance exam for him so that he could pass. He served in Vietnam, came back, and the problems that he had going into the military were simply compounded by his service in Vietnam, and things just sort of went from bad to worse. In about 1982 or 3, he was convicted of killing an elderly woman in Sacramento. It's not really clear that this actually happened, but he took the rap, so to speak. Spent probably 15, 16 years on California death row before he was finally executed by the state of California.
Can I interject? So the person who brought this to our attention, which Larry's was a very good friend of who's just recently died, was a kind of Melvin Myers, top lawyer guy, tough, and broke down in our office saying the failure of his life was he couldn't save Manny Babbitt from being executed.
You know, the story in the book about Manny Babbitt was written by Charles Patterson, who recently died. Chuck died at the end of July. He was also a Vietnam vet. He is also one of the top litigators in the city of Los Angeles, working for one of the top law firms downtown LA. And despite his best efforts, was unable to save Manny Babbitt, who was put to death finally. This is a close-up of Manny here. The image on the left is from the Army Institute. It's a famous painting showing the 2,000-yard stare. And this is the kind of thing that happens to those who've seen too much too up close in terms of the trauma of war, literally. And there are many other pictures like this that one could find in photography and so on, in terms of displaying what happens to you psychically, emotionally, and all of that. PTSD is a reality, and these two images capture that pretty well, I think. This is a close-up of the prime painter's image. You can see quite clearly here the close-up, the detail. This took a little extra wrangling from the British Museum to get this close-up, because this is not the kind of image that you normally get when you ask for a photograph of this pot. And so we had to ask for a special shot of it in order to bring out the detail of the two faces face-to-face here. But it's quite worth the endeavor, and worth the extra expense and all to get this particular image. It shows the two warriors up close very, very nicely. And then I think this is the last one. The image I'll start with the image on the right. The image on the right I actually took in Vietnam in 1970, and it shows another dimension to the many faces of war. That is the young, who are the witnesses to things that they do not understand but yet still suffer, and they carry the trauma as clearly as the adults who are doing the fighting and all the rest of it, and clearly will not forget. I think the other interesting thing about it is that it's interesting to note, amid the poverty, amid the trauma of war, that they're still smiling, and that says something about the nature of the human character, I think. And then lastly, on the left is a painting by a World War I artist named William Orpen, who was inspired to paint this after traveling across the Western Front in 1917, 1918, and coming across a soldier who had survived a shelling, and Orpin claims that this is exactly what he saw, a man coming out of the trench clearly, really without any clothes on. They'd been literally blown off, and clearly not really aware of his surroundings. What's interesting about this, I think quite clearly, is that imagine the force of the explosions that blow your clothes off, and imagine what that's doing to your brain as your brain bounces back and forth inside your skull. And again, all these things you hear about shell shock, battle trauma, and all the rest of it are clearly, without a doubt, these things really do happen. Okay. That's it. Okay.
So Michael Berg. So Michael Berg and I should do this. I'm going to do it right. Okay. So Michael Berg and I are kind of brothers in crime. Michael Berg is a professor of mathematics, but we were both the same genetic structure, I guess. We're socially economic. We're both Dutch and Indonesian. We're both the last colonial babies to be born in. You were born in Brazil, I'm sorry to say, but I was born in Indonesia from mixed race parents. And so I had to drag and kick Michael Berg to do this book with me, which is next, The Past is a Foreign Country. And this is a book that we just published about our families who either died or suffered on the concentration camps of the Japanese and occupation of Indonesia, which most people in America don't know anything about. So that is on the left my grandmother. The two men in the middle were both murdered in the Japanese concentration camp, and that's my great aunt. That's what we did. And so what we did is translate two graphic novels. One was I found that my parents had, which was written in the concentration camp where my grandfather was killed. Another which just fell into our laps because somebody out of nowhere threw it our way and corroborated what the other account said. And so I'm envious, as Michael I think is too, of Jewish culture, which says never forget, and our culture says
never remember.
Never remember. So we don't talk about it. So I had a long, hard time trying to talk to many of our elderly families who brought this up. So let's do the next clip.
This is our my family. On the photograph on the left, that's my grandfather. On my mother's side, my grandmother and their oldest child, who died when he was 2 years old. My grandfather was a resistance fighter in 1940, and he was tortured to death by the Japanese. His corpse was so severely mutilated that my grandmother could only identify him in the prison where he died by a scar on his thumb, because that was what was recognizable, the rest wasn't. So he was a saboteur, and he was captured, he was in fact betrayed by an Indonesian neighbor to the Japanese. And that underscores the difficulty that we had. Teresa and I are, as she said, mixed blood. And the conflict in Indonesia in World War II was stratified three ways. The Japanese, of course, were the invaders. The Indonesians themselves, who had been the victims, as it were, of Dutch colonization for 300 years, turned against the colonials, which is to say, people like Teresa and I of mixed blood. And when the Japanese conquered Indonesia, regular non-military personnel were put in concentration camps on the island. And so my grandmother was one of them. On the photo on the right, that's my grandmother on the left, her husband on the right of my grandfather, and in the middle, this is my mother, my oldest uncle, second oldest uncle, and my youngest uncle. And they were all in my uncle here, this man went to Burma. He was old enough to be in the military, and he was a POW on the Burma Railroad, as was my father. But the younger kids were with in this case with my grandmother, in a citizen internment camp on Java. My mother's now 91 years old, and one of the main reasons why Teresa had to twist my arm for days trying to get her to do this was, a high number of days. was that I was worried about my mother. And when I told her about the project, however, to my great surprise, she was very enthusiastic about it, and it turned out to be a great catharsis for her. I'm seeing her tomorrow. She's on 91, as I said.
Wow.
And she asks frequently about the book. She has a copy of the book. She devoured it. And she aided me in translating the book. My Dutch is fluent, but my Malaysian is not. And so the Malaysian episodes in the book were done by my mother.
And also the book is macaronic, which means it's in German, Latin, Japanese,
Yeah.
all kinds of languages. So we had to pull in all kinds of people to make the book work, right? And that was a little tricky, but we got there, I think.
My mom was a big player in that.
Can we go to the next slide, please? So this is what's left of my family in Indonesia. On the left, my mother's family, who were upper middle class, lost everything, and then they started making gifts for Japanese soldiers for their prostitutes to give them. So these are coconut shells that are designed, I have this in my house, designed to put their makeup in or something like that. So that's how they survived selling this stuff. On the right is was also my grandfather, who I never met, his buttons, which Madeline Wilson took a photograph of, wonderfully both, and his rolling of the cigarettes. So kretek, which you might know, which is the Indonesian clove cigarette, he would roll in that.
My grandmother was an expert at rolling cigarettes from her husband.
Oh, good.
And so it's traditional.
Next one. So we interviewed a lot of people and they wouldn't talk to us, and we interviewed somebody who will remain nameless, who I actually didn't like. And he was a boy in the concentration camps, and he's actually the husband of a Marymount alum. And he came to us, and you didn't like him, and I didn't like him, and I couldn't get anything out of him. I had 5 interviews with this guy, couldn't get anything out of him. Nothing. And then he brought us.
I'd like to interject something. Larry was talking about PTSD. This
Yeah.
gentleman was in such denial
Yeah.
that he began to deny or question the experience of our families.
Yeah.
To raise this in mind, he claimed, for instance, that my family were interned in a camp that didn't exist, and so that certainly made my blood pressure skyrocket. And so that whole experience was peculiar, because here's a man who had been in the camps as a boy, but he really hadn't processed as a boy.
And he kept saying
Or
things
done
like,
so.
oh, it was fun, it was great, when I was a kid, it was good, blah, blah, blah. So he shows up in the last interview with this. So he shows up with that on the right, in a little, like, where you get your medication in that little bottle, which is like, yellow, orange. And I said, what's this? And he said, this is Mickey Mouse. And so we actually located on Amazon, that's the real Mickey Mouse, it's the old Mickey Mouse. I said, what is this? He said, every night in the concentration camp, I put myself to bed with Mickey Mouse. I made him a little house, and he was, with me. And I said, well, what, and this is not somebody I liked, I have to tell you. And he said, that was my conscience. Which is kind of an amazing thing to say for a guy who would not admit to what he was doing. Heard one more thing. So this is from the first graphic novel we translated. This is children pushing what's an ox cart. It's very heavy, taking the trash out. You want to do the next one? This is the humiliation of prisoners. So this is written in English, that they had done something wrong, and now the whole camp would be punished by it, sadistic and so forth. Their heads were shaved. Next one. This is really interesting. This is for the second novel that we published, a graphic novel. So if you don't eat vitamin B1, which is what's in egg whites, you die really quickly. So we actually tracked the guy down who did this. So these are guys peeing into vats, and they turned the urine into stuff to make bread rise. So the urine was turned into it. So this is, you can see we do it in Dutch, and then we do it or whatever in different languages. But they had to do their duty to produce urine in order to make the bread into something that was palatable and would save people.
What's also interesting is that the style in which the narration was done is a very unusual blend of macabre humor, sarcasm, and tragedy, really. And when I came across this way of presenting things in Dutch, this was the language that I grew up with. It's a very unusual dialect. It's not the kind of thing you hear in Amsterdam or The Hague.
No.
You only hear it with colonials like Daisy and myself. And so when I read this, it was striking. And it was very, very difficult to convey that kind of conversational style in English. And I'm actually very happy with how it turned out, but it wasn't easy.
It was not easy.
It was very, very much gallows humor throughout the whole thing.
Next
Not no surprise there.
And this is the last one we're showing, but this is the last row. So you see it's in Dutch, and then it's a scraping the touch of life. These are people who are really starving to death, and they're scraping the bottom of the barrel, literally, to get food out to eat. And leftovers, so we got the second run for people who are getting the burned bits at the bottom of the barrel. I think that's it. Who's next? Okay, so this is Madeline Wilson, who's a photographer, has been working for us for several years, doing, several years, a few years, she's not that young. Old. Sorry, it's been a long day. Sorry, the dean's reception threw me all over the place. Okay, so Madeline did, tell us about what you've been doing.
So we thought we would keep up the cheery mood of the evening
It's getting cheerier as we go on.
discuss some of the photographs I did on Skid Row for a project that I shot with the Institute, but there I think is a cookbook as well. So speaking of collaboration, I think these photos were only possible with the help of Jeff Dietrich, who wrote the book and is pictured in the top left. I think that it's very hard to take these kind of photos without being exploitative or without being seen as sort of condescending and, taking things with a zoom lens across the street to, make a couple bucks off of other people's suffering. And through the help of Jeff, I was able to really approach people and really sort of be very close and very intimate with them. And what I learned is that more than anything else, people are just starved for human contact, whether just eye contact or a hello. And I think that, taking photographs was very exciting for me, but I think also very cathartic for everyone involved. So it was a really great project to be involved in.
So, and this is Ivan Berry's The Christ of the Bread Line, and then this is the soup kitchen that's been running in downtown LA. If you were interested in coming and volunteering or hanging out. But they don't make any big prey. They feed everyone in a beautiful garden, and they've been a Los Angeles Catholic worker for, God knows,
and
50 years.
They never run out of food. Also, if people show up and are hungry, they put some beans on or something. So they do a great service. The one on the left, this man, I think, just his facial structure is so beautiful, and he was a joy to talk to. The one on the right is I spent about a week for this book deciding that I would walk up and down every street in downtown Los Angeles, which I don't know if I can recommend to everyone, but it's a good way to get to know the city. And it's really, I guess, striking, just the disparity, where on one street it's the most expensive condos you've ever seen in your life, with people suffering and people ignoring them. So I think it's important to sort of have an archive of this and kind of bear witness.
And Madeline, can you tell us how it was to talk to the people you photographed?
At first I feel like when you photograph anyone, they're initially cautious of you. And when I shoot film, I pretend like I have a roll of film in when I don't, and shoot a bunch of things, and then 20 minutes later, when they're comfortable, I start shooting film. Whereas I found these people as subjects so happy to have human contact and so happy to have sort of a sense of dignity and a sense of self and a sense of recognition that they immediately opened up and were some of the best subjects I've ever shot. It was great. This woman, you can see all of her belongings are there. She's got kind of an area where she does laundry. And one of the things that really affected me since the shoot is now every time I drive downtown, I look for these people. And the first day that I didn't see her, I started crying in my car. So this one definitely sticks with me. Tracy, you were there too.
Yeah, we were there, and it's pretty moving, yeah.
What I think too, you can't really see as well because these photos are in black and white, but it really is like the kitchen on the inside is this like green oasis. They have actual birds and cages that are chirping, green trees, and when you're walking around, especially this part of LA, it is just barren and sunny. You can see how bright it is outside of this picture. And it really is just like the Garden of Eden in there. I think I've I said.
So, totally different project.
Yeah, this was the first cookbook that I've ever shot before, which is a lot of fun. I love to cook. I think that if I had another career, it would probably be opening a restaurant. And I think food is my favorite art form because if you don't participate in the art of cooking, you'll die at some point.
So this is a book done by Heather King, who is the culture and food editor for the Angelus magazine, which is formerly the Tidings, which some of you may know if you're Catholic. And she cooks, and she wrote a book called Famished, which is food memoir. It's got recipes that are really kind of simple and good and kind of not very expensive. And then just tales about what it means to eat together.
Yeah, she has essays about her life, about her family, the context of the food within that. And this was a great collaborative project because Tracy and I cooked all of the food that was in it and then shot it. So we can personally attest to
and this is the
good.
guy who runs the soup kitchen's bread pudding, which, got a little burn, but it turned out fine.
The recipe has about half a bottle of bourbon on top.
Yeah, and like a lot of butter. Okay, we good? Okay, Karen's gonna come up. So Karen Rapp is one of our newer, I think, wonderful collaborators at LMU. She's the director of the gallery at the Le Bon and also the curator. And we're so thrilled because she's helping us bring the Judy Dare exhibit here and many other exhibits. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about, to me, what is so moving, which is what is it you do when you bring an artist?
So I want to first of all say thank you to Teresia for, I think on maybe it was the 6th working day, invited me down to her office to start a collaboration. And so thank you, Teresia, because being new at LMU and knowing kind of the logistical challenges between U-Haul and then being up on the upper campus, you don't always get to meet as many people as you would like. And it was wonderful to have that opportunity from the very beginning to be part of, her team. And her team also, I think, deserves an amazing hand for making something like this look incredibly easy. So let's give them a round of applause. Well, it's both the graphic, but it's the content really that went into it. So Tracy, I kind of want to turn something a little bit because I was expecting more of a dialogue with you, a collaboration. So would you join me?
Yes, I need this mic so I can stand here, but go ahead.
Move a little bit. So one of the really interesting things that I talked about when I first sat down and I met Gail, is that she said, oh, so you're the person who got the job at the Levant. And what many people don't realize is just, first of all, what an amazing fact it is that on the institutions of higher learning in the United States, that you cannot go to almost any school without finding an art gallery that has been around sometimes 50, sometimes even 100 years. And not to be disrespectful, but we are not known in the United States for necessarily being the great lovers of the arts, especially in the way that they are sometimes not supported as well as in other places in the world. And yet we maintain these art galleries that could become the math lab or something else, and we kind of protect them. And so this is a tradition that comes from the UK. You think of Oxford, you think of amazing collections, and this idea that part of a university's mission is indeed to have an art space. And one other thing is that there usually is only one or maybe two, Harvard and other big campuses, old campuses that have long histories of alumni giving. They might have multiple spaces. We have the beautiful Hannon collection, special collection that preserves our LMU pieces. But these jobs are not easy to get because people tend to stay in them and they tend to really enjoy them. And so I work in a field where people tend to really like their environment, and I happen to love it because I find that the intersection between the the art and the knowledge that I have about art objects and artists just is so enhanced by the collaborative experiences that I've had in universities with amazing faculty and staff, but most of all with students. So my take on this collaborative theme, this idea of coming together and working, it really stems for me from the students and from the population of the institution where I am situated. So I call myself, in essence, the part between the director and the curator is really site-specific. I don't come to LMU with, this is kind of old school, but like a Rolodex of artists that I'm going to bring here necessarily that I've worked with over time. I'm kind of coming here and looking at my surroundings and trying to find out what is important to our students, what is important to the history of the institution, what is going on today in our culture that could be an impetus or a spark for having a show in a gallery. And so this power, if you will, of being able to have an idea and then work with many people to realize that idea is very gratifying, very fulfilling, and that's kind of how I would answer.
Yeah, no,
your
that's
question.
great. And so you have an exhibit coming up after Judy Dater.
So I want to talk a little bit about Judy Dater because,
Go ahead.
so the Judy Dater exhibition is of a woman photographer, and all the art that you have in your brochure, which would include this cover, the back, this amazing portrait, and then there is a self-portrait. The hands are actually a self-portrait as well. The Judy in the desert, the one that you called Stone. Judy is such an amazing example of a photographer who, first of all, she's 77, which kind of blows my mind and makes me look forward to aging in a way of someone who is so productive still and so married to her output and her art. The show itself includes about, I'm going to say, I haven't counted, but at least 50 personalities, 50 people who have met Judy, who have been the sitter, the subject, the object of her gaze. And she's a photographer of human beings. The title of her show is Only Human. And I thought maybe you would just for a moment, how you came up with the title together with it.
She came up with it.
I thought that was a little bit of the collaborative relationship that
A
you
little
have.
bit, but she came up. Yeah.
Okay.
First.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think that it was interesting because we had this show at the De Young Museum, and so we had models there, and then we had model, for instance, this idea of what needs to be only human was what needs to be a human being, and that she photographed human beings. So let's go to
Before we go, so prior to LMU, I worked at a community college of the state of California, on the east side, literally the real east side, the East Los Angeles College, which is the place where almost every Latino politician who's probably over the age of 60 started their career there. And there's an amazing museum that historically showed many artists of color. And so at the time when I took the position there, somewhere more than 10 years ago, I really learned a lot about the community, and I was able to nurture both younger and older artists who came from that part of Los Angeles, and to give them kind of the recognition that maybe had eluded them in their career. And I say that as an example of kind of looking inside, deep inside the institution and finding a way to understand the community in a sense. And so, I don't know if I want to necessarily, but we're out of time. So I'm working right now on a project, and Teresia has the images, and it is definitely one that is involving all of LMU's, she's showing the image. It's a project that started this summer, and it is by a Irish Los Angeles-based artist named Trina McKillen. And this is the first time that I am working on a project that's being, is growing and germinating as we speak. This artist in her mid-50s grew up in a large Catholic family in Belfast and then relocated during the sectarian wars to Dublin. And Trina, the artist, has made work over the last 10 years that is very difficult and tapping into some of the most current and most painful experiences that our community has had with regard to the Catholic Church abuse. And so I have never had a collaborative experience like this in terms of working with the Jesuits, working with the Vice President of Mission and Ministry. And so this is something that I hope you will all pay attention to as it evolves with many of our faculty, and I would almost call it like a composition of events and outreach that will talk about history, about causation, about pain, mourning, and I'm not sure, getting a little choked up, about healing and redemption. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Is our, don't run away too fast. There's lots of really good snacks coming up. We'll be fast. We'll be fast. Will Coop is our artist in residence from the Marymount Institute for Faith, Culture, and the Arts, and he has done some amazing things, and we're going to go, we're ripping it through, right? Here we go. Will, tell us. So, well, I first met Will through Anya O'Healy, who's sitting here someplace, who said, oh, I've got this nice Italian artist who's got this amazing classical way of drawing. And we met, and you started drawing, and I wanted something for the Institute, which was about the power of women, and got some donors, and we did something crazy. So go ahead.
Well, this is my first collaborative piece here at the university, and my introduction to Teresia actually came through
Anya.
Was Jane Brucker.
Is that right? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
That was Anya. Sorry.
I'm sure some point.
Oh, well, everybody's involved. Who knows? It's collaborative. Everybody can be involved.
That's exactly it. So the collaboration basically started that way. Teresia walked me out into the garden down there in the Marymount Institute, and she said, we have this garden that was not kept up very well. It's kind of just a place to exit the building in case of an emergency.
It was terrible.
Yeah, it was not pretty.
No.
And Teresia has this wonderful ability to kind of get the ball rolling, just connect with people, and give them an opportunity to do something. So this is my first opportunity, basically. And I had no idea what to do. I came up with different ideas. Teresia kind of shot all of them down, and we talked about it a little more. It's a good thing. It's part of the process.
Kind person. This is so nice.
Of course, you're a wonderful person. But it is a collaboration, and that's how it got started. So we talked about it some more. She came up with the idea. She wanted it to be more of a feminine representation of the Marymount Institute and the feminine part of the university. So we came up with the idea of the muses. And she gave me a number of muses. She said it could be any number, and I researched it a little bit. It could have been 3, it could have been 5 or 9. We settled on 9. And then the formation of the piece, the fact that it's kind of like this bas relief. Okay, I'm not sure if you can tell from the photograph, but those of you who have seen it know that it's about 5 feet wide, 2.5 feet high, and about 8 inches deep. Basically, it is a bas relief that you can read from 2 sides. And I'll make a comment about the process of making this. I'm not sure how much time you have
Yeah.
here. So it is about collaboration, and we talked about that for a little bit. But there's a lot of hours spent alone in the studio actually making a piece. Many hours. It's hard to believe. And I'm comfortable in that environment, but then I realized I was sitting here and we're talking about collaboration, that I'm really not alone because, and I could be wrong about doing this, but when I'm making a piece, whether it be drawings or sculpture, I am thinking about the audience that it's being made for. So for me, it's a dialogue that I'm having with all of you, even though you don't know it. And you may not even agree with what it is I'm doing, but I am aware and conscious of that one day this piece is going to be for others.
Yeah, great, and it was this wonderful, and I just want to say the last little bit, which is when we put this thing down, we had to get the basalt columns and the trees, and we had all these guys, like LMU guys, who were working on the grounds with the thing, and they were like, I like that one, and I like this one. I was like, don't drop them, okay? You're like, we have 15 minutes to glue the whole thing in, remember that? And they were just like, I brought beer, of course, and so everything was fine. And we put it in, and they were all just, they're the muses, and we can drop water down the basalt columns from the muses themselves. Can we do the next one? So then Will did another picture because the Marymount, as you may know, RSHMs are no longer on campus. I wanted to have a something that someone could look at and say, this is the story of the founding of the Religious and Sacred Heart of Mary. So Will did this piece. Will.
Sister Francis, I spoke with first, and she gave me the autobiography by Father Gaiac, and so a lot of the symbols in this piece come from that. It really just goes back to the origins of how the order was founded initially, and the first Mother Superior, Mary St. John.
So she was a rich woman whose husband died. They were friends of the priest, and she got depressed.
When the husband and wife were in agreement that when one of the two would pass away, the other would dedicate their lives and their wealth to Father Gaiac and his initiatives. And so when her husband passed away, she then basically gave all her money to Father Gaiac, and she became the first Mother Superior of the order.
And so in the background we have the orphanage. She took care of prostitutes, poor women and children. It's from Béziers in the south of France. So we've got the sheep, the books, the wine, the vines, the whole kind of story about what they did. They were very kind of cool about what they did and took care of refugees and so forth, right? And all right, next one.
A lot of you probably recognize this as a student memorial sculpture. Here on campus, it's on the east side of the chapel, close to the bell tower. And this for me was just an amazing experience, definitely very collaborative on every level. The first, I went through many stages on this project here. At a certain point, the committee that made the proposal to do a piece asked my first idea, how did I come up with it? Because again, the first idea I came up with was not appreciated, let's put it that way. But again, that's all part of the process, and
And it was also very difficult, as you might imagine, that if you are mourning a dead child, what do you want to see? And it was very, very complicated. You know about the Vietnam Memorial, many memorials. Many people were not happy. Some people wanted a block, some people wanted this, some people wanted that. It was really tough for us to do what we did, right? And so you interviewed parents.
Right. That was, so I interviewed parents, students who had known a student who had passed away, faculty, administrators here on campus to have an idea of what everybody would like to see in such a piece. And so kind of bringing all those ideas together, I came up with this concept here.
And also, all the bodies, can we do the next one? Is there another one of this? Oh, sorry. But all the bodies are composites. So there's a student with an Asian face who's got a white body, who's a this, who's a that. We composited all the bodies, and there's people looking away and people looking in. And there's a big space that looks out into the university and then out onto the cliffs. So uniting the city with the university in some ways, right? And very different people looking out. And so the last one you're going to talk about, which is for our theme of the affiliation, is that the Sisters of Religious Heart of Mary are buried nearby. There's no memorial, and this is what you've just done, right?
Well, this is just the initial stages of making a model. Before writing at this point here, probably about 25, 30 concept drawings, and then we settled in on what symbols we'd like to have in the piece, what subject matter, and so this is a maybe like 24 inches tall clay model in the very early stages. And right now, what I'm doing is working on the final piece. It's about 7 feet tall and 5 feet wide, and we'll hopefully finish that at the end of this month, and it'll be installed at Holy Cross Cemetery here in Color City.
I think the theme of all of what you do is that the hands are touching each other and they're taking from each other, and someone learning to read, someone going to heaven and taking care of babies, right?
Yeah, I spent a lot of time on what I'm doing here. I'm working out the composition and also the position of the heads and how the subjects are relating to each other. So I spent a lot of time on at this stage here working out those things there, how the hands will be positioned and the communication of the figures with each other.
Fabulous. So we're going to now go to Gail Vronsky's going to come up with you. We can share that. So Gail and Will work together. So Gail's a poet in the English department and worked together to do a children's book. And this was, sorry, I'm supposed to be here. This was a great challenge in some ways for you because you did a sculptor and a painter and drawer and not an illustrator. So go ahead.
Right, and as a poet, I'd never had my work illustrated before. So this was so interesting to me. My writing of children's poems started when I had the great good fortune of teaching study abroad in London for a semester. And I spent my free time poking around Portobello Road and all the thrift stores and antique stores and bookstores. And what captivated me were children's books. And these old, a lot of like early 20th century, late 19th century children's books that I just became enchanted with. So I spent that semester writing children's poems, which is something I never thought I would do. And somehow, I mentioned this to Theresia, and she said, oh, let me see them, because she's like that. And so I gave them to her, and she said, let's do a book. And then we were thinking of who might illustrate it, and she thought of Will, and Will, you took it from there.
Go for it. Next slide.
Well, this was actually the first drawing I did because I wanted to give you an example of what the drawings might look like. And after reading the poems, I was thinking of Winnie the Pooh. Not to say that the poems are like Winnie the Pooh. Right?
Oh, listen, I wish.
But the images that are in the first version of the illustrations of that, I was thinking in those terms. So it's like a very loose style of drawing with pen and ink, and in this case, color wash, which is not part of the originals, but that's what I was thinking of. And aside, I did have difficulty on this project, not because of the poems actually made it very easy to come up with imagery, because they're really kind of playful, and there's a lot of color and lots of, you can imagine yourself in different places and different characters, so it afforded a lot of opportunity to come up with all kinds of ideas. The difficulty in me lied in drawing for me has always been about study, about like research. And so my drawings typically aren't meant to be seen. They're just there for me, typically. So in this case, I had to do 32 drawings where there's definitely a consistency. And that was a challenge for me to do that.
Could you read the poem?
Yes, absolutely.
My favorite one.
Oh, where is it? Oh, it's in my purse. Just a second. Yes, the Book of Ratsky. And this poem was inspired by a pet rat I actually had named Ratsky. He was quite a character. He used to like to get drunk. You'd give him a little sip of your booze, and he'd pass out on your shoulder. That's not really
Sounds
suitable.
like boyfriends I've had.
Yeah, right. That's not really suitable for children. So this is his transformation. The Book of Rats. A rat wrote a book about being a rat, about what it is like to be chased by a cat, and what does he dream of? Candy bars mostly, and what he's afraid of, rooms that are ghostly. And what does he think about people who chase him around with a broom, that if they asked nicely, he'd exit their room. With his hat and umbrella, his newspaper folded, he'd saunter right out. There's no need to be scolded. That is the topic of chapter 11. And then he goes on to describe a rat's heaven, how he'd like to wear there the wings of a moth and decorate rat holes with beautiful cloth, and write his rat poems, eat cream that was clotted, and not have to worry about being swatted. Then there's advice about grooming rat nails, shampooing rat whiskers, maintaining rat tails, how to avoid being caught by a bird, and it's all very useful and smart, so I've heard, but of course I can't tell. It's the size of one word.
So here's some more. We just talk about the images, and then we're almost done. And then you can all get nice beverages and snacks. Beautiful. Next one. This is the fairies. It's amazing, to work together. It's really fun.
I mean, these drawings showed me something, a side of my poems that I had not seen myself. I had sort of had this Gothic image of them, a 19th century image, basically, kind of dark and a little spooky, and Will took them and made them really suitable for children.
So I'm going to end with this. This is one of my favorite portraits of Judy Day, which will be in the exhibit. And Judy told me once personally, this guy has a real name, Russ Ellis. She said, I call him God. And I end with this because maybe he or she, God, was the first and only person, initially at least, to have worked alone. Done. Thanks to all the panelists. Come and have something to drink and eat. Are you going to say something?
Yes, very quickly. Thank you, Teresia, for bringing this to the library. I think this has been a wonderful event. Thank you to all of our speakers. I think we should do one more round of applause for our speakers. Y'all have given us such a delicious taste of a far more complex and far richer table spread that I hope awaits everyone in the atrium. Did you see what I did there? In any case, please give us your feedback forms at some point during the evening. There's a box up here at the front. A reminder that the gallery is open for you to explore. Please do not bring food into the gallery. Please talk to Nina. Please talk to our speakers. And please have a good time. Thank you.
I love that poem. I used to
All right.
think
Take care. Thank you again.
that's so great.